All right, so today we are looking at Revelations chapter 4 and 5. I got a haircut, so really short. Anyway, so today we're looking at Revelation chapters 4 and 5. Both are pretty short chapters, which is pretty cool, pretty nice. They're not as long as 2 and 3. However, there's a lot in here, and it's just right before Jesus starts to open the scroll by breaking the seven seals. So there's a lot building up in this. There's like tension in heaven about the scroll and who's going to open it and things like that. It's just really cool. So let's get into it. All right. So right away, verse 1 in chapter 4 is pretty amazing. So for all of you pre-tribbers, although I'm not sure what I am, I lean in between maybe pre-trib and mid-trib / pre-wrath. I don't know. I think it would be really cool to see kind of the events that unfold right before the wrath, but then also at the same time, after looking at what the seals are, I kind of don't want to be here for that. So, not really the wrath of God, but more of like the wrath of the Antichrist, and I don't really want to be part of that. Anyway, let's get back to the topic. All right, so in Revelation, we have chapter 1, 2, and 3, and all three of those mention the church. And then when you get to chapter 4, there's no mention of the church between chapter 4 and all the way to the end of Revelation, chapter 22. So you have this period of chapter 4 through chapter 22 where there's no mention of the church. So some scholars speculate that the rapture would be in between the events of chapter 3 and chapter 4 because there is no mention of the church, only Israel. So, pretty cool. So, chapter 4 also is the start of Daniel's 70th week. And if you've read the book of Daniel, you know that Daniel talks about some stuff that, for a lot of us who are not scholars, just kind of goes right over our heads. Maybe in the future I'll do some videos on Daniel's 70 weeks because it is end times related. And we can kind of see what maybe Holy Spirit gives me on that. Okay, so basically, so 70 weeks basically just means 7 periods of 7, most likely 7 blocks, I guess, we'll call them blocks, of 7 years. So, it's kind of interesting. So, it follows roughly that all the way up from the time of Daniel all the way until the death and resurrection of Jesus. You see roughly periods of 7 weeks, 69 of them, and then there is a furlough, I guess, in the weeks between when Jesus rises from the dead and the tribulation, the Great Tribulation, because it's been roughly 2,000 years almost since Jesus rose from the dead, and we're still waiting for the 70th week. So the last week is the tribulation. 7 years, last week. Okay. So if you want to know more about that, read the book of Daniel. It's very amazing. Not all prophetic and visionary, but has some stuff in there. All right. So we look at verses 2 and 3. The one who's sitting on the throne, obviously, is God. But what's interesting is what John perceived. So you have to remember that John is most likely in a vision. So we don't know if what John is speaking of are colors, or maybe what the colors represent, or maybe just how he felt. We don't know. It's a vision. So maybe he's not really seeing like a physical appearance. Maybe he's seeing glory or whatever. And also, he might not have had the vocabulary to explain what he saw. But he said he saw God as jasper, which is like a semi-transparent green, and he was as jasper and something called sardius. Remember, I'm reading from the New King James Version, so this might be different in yours. But so basically, God was like a semi-transparent green / red, and he had an emerald rainbow around the throne, which is also greenish. So then around the throne were 24 other thrones, going into verse 4. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'll just tell you whenever chapter 4 ends. So these are likely people redeemed from the Old Testament and New Testament. So basically these thrones surround God's throne. So these people might have been people who were exceedingly faithful during their lifetimes. Also, it could be just a representation of the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 original apostles. But also at the same time, remember, you have to look at the Old Testament was uh, the Old Testament priesthood, the Old Testament sacrificial system, Old Testament temple. It was all modeled after heaven. What Moses saw in heaven, God had him model on earth and gave him the model. So in the Old Testament, the priesthood had 24 elders. So that could also be what it is. Or it could be all of them. We don't know. So basically, the 24 elders' jobs, they're to sit on thrones, to worship God, to cast down their crowns before God, and to fall on their face before God, to sing and play harps, to act as priests, and to give John revelation throughout this book. So also, not only do we see God as jasper and sardius with an emerald rainbow, but also from the throne there's flashes of lightning and thunder. The New King James Version also mentions voices that you can hear from the throne. They could be the voices of the 24 elders, or maybe the angels, or maybe the raptured saints. Don't know. But there were 7 lamps of fire, which signify the 7 spirits of God, which is the fullness of God. I also thought of the baptism of the Holy Spirit in fire, because here he's portrayed as 7 lamps of fire. So let's go back to, basically this whole chapter is just talking about the throne, just how magnificent it is. It's really amazing. So also the floor of the throne was a sea of glass. So I was like, okay, that's awesome. It's just floor of just glass. So what are you seeing? Where is it? Maybe you're seeing the cosmos. I don't know. And so because John was in the Spirit, I was thinking maybe because this isn't like a tangible place, maybe it's spirit. So God, so God and all of them are just kind of like hovering over creation, which would be pretty cool. And then also in the background, you probably see like stars and planets and just all of creation. But then he also mentions the 4 living creatures. And these are pretty interesting because they're like a separate kind of like group of angels. And so they're full of eyes, which eyes usually mean wisdom. They're angelic, heavenly beings. And basically what they do is they proclaim God is holy. They worship God on their face. They sing and play harps. I actually said that right. I just messed it up in my head. They offer the prayers of the saints to God, and they call forth the horsemen later on. They give the bowls to angels, the bowls of wrath to angels later on, and they listen to the worship of other beings. So this is what happens. There's like the sequence of events, and it'll unfold a little bit more in chapter 5. So whenever the living creatures glorify God, the 24 elders follow this by casting down their crowns and laying on their faces in worship while proclaiming God's greatness. And it's pretty interesting because anytime they do this, the 24 elders do this. And then you'll see in chapter 5 that there's even more of a sequence of events that happen. And it's almost like this recurring thing over and over and over again. So I forgot who it was, but they had this picture in their mind that anytime the 24 elders cast on their crowns, how do they get them back? Because it never says that they pick them back up. So maybe what happens is Jesus is just walking around the throne. They're casting their crowns before him, and he's just like puts it back on their head basically. And then as soon as they look up at him, they just cast it back down again, and he puts it back on and then casts it. Like, it's just, I don't know. It's a pretty cool, thing, I guess, if you think about it. All right, so that was the end of chapter 4. Basically, was the throne room of God and the magnificence of it. It was just amazing. Just reread chapter 4 and just ask God to show you what it might have looked like. It's amazing. Imagine you're just John and you're standing there, and basically there's nothing all around you. There's no walls, there's no floor. That's why he said it was a sea of glass, probably because there wasn't anything. Some versions say crystal, but so basically like super transparent, if I am aware of what crystal is. But yeah, pretty amazing. Emerald rainbows, sea of glass, lightning and thunder, God as jasper and sardius, just amazing. All right, so let's get into chapter 5. So in the right hand of God there was a scroll, and the scroll had 7 seals. So each seal is discussed in the next few chapters, which we'll get into, chapters 6, 7, and 8. But So what happened was God had this scroll, and John, I guess, understood the significance of what was written on the scroll and how important it was. And there was a search made, and the New King James says by a strong angel. So an angel that, if we were to see him, we would cower probably, and we would assume that he would be able to open the scroll because he's a strong angel. But he makes a search, heaven, earth, and even under the earth, and could find no one worthy to open the scroll. And so John cried. John was, I guess, so just weighted by the glory and weighted by the significance and the importance of this scroll and of the throne and everything that's going on around him, and he just cried. I guess that was the only response that he felt was I don't know, that was worthy of the moment. But yeah, so no one was found to open it, and no one was found worthy to even look at the scroll. So that's interesting. So then it says that only one person in all of existence was worthy to open the scroll, Jesus Christ. He was only able to open it because he prevailed and overcame. So then it also says that Jesus is, basically they say his names that they give him in this first few verses is the Lion of Judah and the Root of David. And so John looks, and he said that he saw in the midst of the 7 lampstands one with, I think he said, one with eyes of fire and 7 horns. And he was, it was a lamb that had appeared as though it had been slain. So John looks over in the midst of the 7 golden lampstands of fire, and he sees one as a lamb as though it had been slain, with 7 horns and 7 eyes. So he doesn't see Jesus as like a person. He sees him for what he's done, almost like his glorified state, and somehow he knew everything Jesus had done, and I don't even understand what he saw, but I remember when I was reading this and I was like, starting to tear up because I was like, Jesus, like, what is this? And even right now, it's like, man, it's amazing. 7 horns and 7 eyes. Ah, man. So, anyway, horns usually indicate strength or kingship, and eyes are usually wisdom. So the fullness of kingship and wisdom. So Jesus actually had to approach the throne of God, and it said that he took the scroll out of the right hand of the Father. And so I was thinking, I was like, oh my gosh, like, like no one in all of existence was even worthy to look at the scroll, let alone approach the Father. And Jesus is so worthy and so glorified and so just amazing, just king, priest over everything, that he's not only worthy, but he walks up to God and he takes the scroll out of his right hand. But no one else can do this. Usually it would have to be like the Father would give it to an angel who would give it to someone else. Jesus, the Father didn't give the scroll to Jesus. Jesus took the scroll. So it was like you see this I don't know how to describe it. But we know that the Father, Jesus, and the Spirit are all God. They're all one. It's a triune being. They're a Trinity. They're all equal. And so Jesus shows this by going up and taking something from the Father. It's almost saying like we're at the same level. We have the same amount of power. We're the same. So therefore, what is yours is mine. That's pretty much how I'm seeing it. I hope that doesn't sound heretical. Anyway. Oh, it's very amazing. So Jesus takes the right hand, or the scroll from the right hand of the Father. So then after this, we see golden bowls of incense. And so these are the prayers of the saints, which is interesting because if these bowls of incense are always burning, which is what they were doing in the Old Testament temple, they always had to burn incense, then that means that the prayers of the saints are always continuously coming up before the Father, and they're like a pleasurable aroma before the throne. And Mike Bickle from the International House of Prayer, I think I said this in my last video, but he said that basically your prayers from the moment that they're prayed continuously come up before the Father. And it's a continuous reminder of your prayer before the Father, which is pretty cool because it's like God receives glory from our prayers, among other things. So this is why Jesus is worthy to open the scroll, because he was crucified, because his blood redeems us, because he makes us kings and priests to God, and he lets us reign on the earth, both now in part, later in the millennial reign, and even later in the New Jerusalem. So then we're almost finished with chapter 5. So then we see that the throne of God is surrounded by an innumerable people group. So there's only a couple of things that I could think of. Either it's the raptured saints, which makes the pre-trib rapture plausible. It could also be the thousands of legions of angels from the Gospels. Whenever Jesus was in was in the Garden of Gethsemane when he was getting ready to be arrested, I believe that's what it is. You guys have to remember, I'm doing all this off the top of my head besides the notes I have from Revelation. So these like correspondences I have with the rest of the scriptures off the top of my head. I could be wrong as far as placement, but I think I'm right as far as content. So he's in the garden, and the garrison comes out to arrest him, and Peter draws his sword and cuts off the ear of the high priest's servant, and Jesus heals it, and he said, "Do you not think that even right now I could call down and have at my disposal 13,000 legions of angels," which is an innumerable amount of angels, honestly. So anyway, so these are surrounding the throne of God. And then we see what I was talking about earlier with the crowns and all that. So basically, this is what happens. So first, those in heaven praise Jesus and the Father. Then all of creation, in turn, praises Jesus and the Father. And then all of heaven worships again. So this is what I was talking about, like this, like continuous things. You have the 24 elders, the 4 living creatures, the innumerable people, and then you have creation and all back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So it's just like this endless cycle of praise. So it's pretty crazy. Heaven must be filled with worship 24/7. So if you don't like worship, you might not like heaven. Learn to love worship now. So yeah, that's all I have for Revelation chapter 4 and 5. Kind of short chapters, but there's a lot in here if you'll just take the time to read it and really just let it soak in, pray, and allow Holy Spirit to just kind of show you maybe glimpses of what John was allowed to see. So, I don't know. I don't think anyone really knows about the timing of the rapture or if the rapture even exists. Some people don't believe it exists because there's no term rapture in the Bible. However, in the Latin Bible, there was a term rapturo, which is where we get the term rapture. So for those who say that the rapture isn't in the Bible, it's not in the English Bible because it was in the Latin Bible, which translated, there's a catching away, I guess. So, but there are implications, I guess, throughout the New Testament of a rapture or a catching away or Jesus removing us. So you just got to read, pray, read it for yourself. I thoroughly recommend and just implore you guys to read the Bible for yourselves from beginning to end. And then when you're done, do it all again. I read the Bible. I read 2 pages of the Bible at a time. So this is my study Bible. This is not the one I read out of because it's huge. But basically, so you can't see it. All right, so chapter 16 of Matthew starts here. And then there's no other chapter. So let's just say 16, and then read through, and then the next page, if it goes correctly, 17 starts here. So basically, I'd start chapter 16, read all the way through it to the end of 16, which would be here. And then the next day, 17, all the way through 18, and then wherever 18 stops, which in this case would be here. And that would be in my next day. and then so on and so forth. So that way, if for some reason I go a week, a year without reading the Bible, I can pick up right where I left off without questioning. Just keep my bookmark there, open it up. I know on the left is the first chapter I need to read all the way through to the end of the last chapter on the right, which, yeah. So I generally read through the Bible every 1.5 to 2.5 years. So it is a lengthy process, and there's some times, honestly, where I'm just like trudging through and just trying to get through those chapters because I'm like, God, I don't know why you put this in the Bible, but I am so bored right now. But as you read through it, the Holy Spirit will start to remind you of things that you have read. He'll start to connect things, and so every time you read through it, it's like, oh wow, this goes here and this goes here, and it's just like this connection, and like it's just amazing what God did with His Word, and how it all just kind of goes together. And plus, you'll be able to start answering questions you have. Like, yeah, there's some people who are like, they'll say things like, oh, well, the Bible has so many contradictions. Okay, name one, please. Because I thought so too, and I would read through the Bible just out of faith, like, God, you said your word is infallible. We believe it's infallible. We believe there's no errors in it. So what are these contradictions? And I started looking into it, and then I realized they're not contradictions. They're just contextually different based on the time periods. And you look at it, and it means this here, and then when you go over here, even though it sounds like it means the same thing or something contradicting, it's actually not even the same topic. So, yeah, you just got to do that. All right, guys. Love you. See you later.